Hi, Russ here, and it's UFO Paranormal TV and Flying Saucer Television. And tonight's guest is Jani. And what did I say? Banani.
Johnny Banani. Yes.
I nearly said
Hi.
banana, but never mind. That's pretty good for me, actually. So anyway, Jani is a paranormal investigator plus a cryptozoologist, and she's had a few things going on with UFOs as well. And so, Jani, where did all this start with you? What happened first? Did the UFOs come first, or basically just tell us where it all started? From you, from your point.
Sure. No worries. So for me, my story began. I was born a gifted. Like a lot of people are born gifted. It was about the age of 7 when my mum realized that, when toddlers are so little, everybody's got that psychic ability. But she said once I got to about 7, she realized that my gifts just weren't going. She'd explained to me things like, family members who would meet me at Christmas and then get me to give them readings and stuff like that. That was just randomly, out of the blue, but I'm only a toddler at this age. She said that I was at school and one of my teachers was dating a scientist. And the scientist wanted me to go and live on campus. So he turned out to be one of the neurological scientists who would flip cards from one room, and they wanted me to go and be one of their guinea pigs. And my mum basically said, no, that's just not going to happen. She just thought I would grow out of it. So as my teens progressed, my abilities just got a little bit stronger, where I managed to claim the nickname Psychic Jinna from my friends, which meant Psychic Jana. And then, I met my dad when I was 18. And when I was 20, I came back to New Zealand, which is where I'm from. And so I sat with him for a week, just getting to know him. And he then proceeded. I thought I was actually had mental health issues. I thought I was schizophrenic. I thought because I was hearing and seeing things, and it was just seemingly at the same time as I'm coming out of my teens and going into adulthood, my gifts just seemed to have just expanded. And he said, when you get to the age of 20, it does open up. It actually is like, the lotus flower will just open up and then all hell breaks loose. And I thought, no, like I wasn't really equipped for that kind of information. So I then proceeded to take myself to go and be assessed by doctors and, psychiatrists and psychologists and counselors. And because I just needed an answer, that I had mental health issues. Above all else, I could not accept for a very long time that I had these kind of abilities. And I just had a bird fly up and sit. That is so weird. I just had a bird fly up and just like flapping its wings in the window staring at me. That was crazy. So I'm like, is it coming back? I want to whip the camera around and show you. So then, where was I? That just took me from. That was crazy. Right. So, I just couldn't accept. I could not accept that.
What kind of bird were it, by the way?
Yeah, I know it was even worse because.
What kind of bird were it?
It was a little sparrow.
All right. I'm going to say it wasn't a robin, were it?
No, it was a little sparrow. I have a thing, like I have superstitions with birds. And so with the sparrows, if it comes inside the house, that somebody close to you is going to die. And I've just shipped my brother off with the family because we're all come on a holiday, a weekend away. So I hope, and I saw the roads and icy, I hope that wasn't like a bit of a sign.
Well, did it come in the house?
No, it didn't, but it was flapping at the window.
It was just a friendly bird. They're just a friendly bird saying hi. I get them
Yeah.
occasionally.
Anyway,
Saying hi.
so what was that? So yeah, I was at that point up until 25, 26. I was still, this isn't normal. This is, people shouldn't be thinking like this. How, even it doesn't matter how or what situations that I'd come across within my scope of abilities, I just wasn't, I was attracting a lot of things around me, and I still just didn't understand it.
You want accepting it. You want accepting it, in other words.
I wasn't, no, and I just
No.
couldn't. I was
No.
thinking like it was just too irrational. The things that I was doing was too irrational. The things that I was seeing, the abilities, it was just the abilities, and it just seemed too irrational for me. So I really did struggle for a lot of my youth to believe that I was actually gifted. And so a lot of people will be, will harbor the mediumship abilities and psychic abilities. And there's a duck. And, there'll be, there's remote viewing. There's the scope of people's abilities is profound. And so for what I was getting, I was going through, at that point, I was also having children. And so, I would have lots of little spirit children running around the house playing with my kids. I would have poltergeist in my house. I would, thinking I was going crazy. You put your keys down and then you go back to pick them up and they're not there. And, you'll shut all your cupboard doors and then you realize that like the cupboard doors are reopened and you're thinking, no, this isn't, you kind of tend to question your sanity, And so, there was just just numerous things like that were going on. And then even though I knew, like, and I would fix the picture frames up and then you'd walk out the room, you come back and I know I did that. Like I purposely would remember. And it got to the point where my house would be so pristine. Like I would make sure everything had its place and everything was in its place. So when stuff was moved, I would know. And then when the activity started to rise, I would not dust. So then I would know that that there were things happening in the house, because you would see the dust marks and you would see, just random little things like that. So I got to a point where I was like, no, this is it. I know that I know that this is happening, but I'm just going to go to the psychiatrist just to check. Like, I just want to go and get that validation. And so what was going on was I was having, at that point, pregnant and giving birth to children who were quite psychic children as well. And with my firstborn, she was 5. So I was 23 at the time. She was 5 weeks old. 5 days old. And I wake up in the middle of the night and I hear this language that I've never heard again. I do not know what kind of language it was, but I've woken up. The rooms were dark. Now, the way that so I was looking after my mother who had cancer at the time. So I was living at home with my partner and my newborn baby. And we lived above the garage, which we had a huge, so it was a double garage, but we had a big granny flat on top of it. And we'd built it to accommodate for a small family. Yeah. So we had the lounge room, the kitchen, the little, her bedroom, like my daughter's bedroom, and then our bedroom. And so there was an open door. My bed was my bed was this side, her bedroom was that side. I had her cot behind the wall. Now I've woken up in the middle of the night and I've heard this language, and I don't know what language it is. I've never heard it again. I would love to go into some sort of hypnosis and just speak it so that I can, go, see if people can validate where it's come from. And she didn't wake up. There was nothing. But I've woken up and I could hear this man in this really deep, gruff voice speaking a language over my daughter's cot. And I was frozen stiff. I couldn't move. I thought, and it was there was the fear that came over me. I thought, and this is where I thought my bad parenting 101, because I thought, if I'm going to wake up in the morning and my daughter has died of SIDS, that's out of my hands, and I literally couldn't function. And then I thought, no. And then I had this, it was almost like this vision came over me where I had seen that in her 20s, something was going to happen between us in our relationship. And it stems from this particular spell or whatever thing that this man has done to this baby. And I had caught a glimpse of what was happening. And so I thought, okay, no, that's fine. Woke up, she was fine. I was relieved. I thought, okay, well, maybe we won't know until later. Well, that did happen. So me and my daughter had a fallout when she was in her 20s. Believe it stems from that. And I really need to get back and try and find out what that information was. Next to that, I was also I'd given birth when I was 25 to another daughter, and she's very gifted as well. She was walking around at that point. I had lots of little spirit children running around the house who would play with her, and she would set up her room, and she would have a circle of teddies and dolls, and then there would be one open gap, and I'd walk in she'd go, come and play with me, mummy, we're having a tea, and I'm okay, darling, and I'll go to sit in that spot. What are you doing, mum? Sophie's sitting there. And I'll be like, oh, so this is her little best friend, Sophie. And, she'd come and after months of having this friend, she came to me one day and she's like, Sophie would like to sit and eat dinner with us, mum. And I was like, okay. So we set the table and we leave a little spot for Sophie. I hope Sophie's enjoying her dinner. And, she's only like a toddler, so you got to entertain these little minds. Well, shortly after that, and I did actually think when she said that, was that Sophie was getting stronger. And so at that same time, I was having a lot of poltergeist activity in my home, again, with the doors opening and shutting and stuff like that. And I thought maybe, where's the balance between Sophie, who's this cute little child, just wants to hang out with my daughter, or, is there more entities in the house? And, this is different energies. And so I continued just, play the game, mummy's working and daughter's playing with Sophie. And anyway, one day I walked out of my bedroom. My partner and I had been watching television. I got up to go and get a drink. And I just happened to walk past, looking, checking on the girls, and here's Sophie waking the girls up. And they would always be woken up. No, go away. I'm sleeping. I'm not allowed to be awake. Go away. We can't play. Like all these just random things that they'd be waking up. I didn't realize that Sophie'd been in there waking them up. So I had to go in and say to her, Sophie, they need to sleep. You can play with them tomorrow. And, when you're walking around not believing that you're actually gifted and saying these things, it just increases that whole, I'm an idiot. So I eventually got to the point where I thought I'd been and seen the psychiatrist for the second last time, actually.
What did you just sorry to break you off, but
okay.
One thing just to say, right, yeah, is you're talking about, like in your bedroom and there's this entity looking, whatever you want to call it, over the cot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've come across that, on a few occasions now, just, to tell you the truth. But going back to the question I was going to ask you, which was, so what did your husband say, your partner say to you when all this was going on?
When we first met, and I had sort of explained to, when you meet somebody and you tell them everything about you and how you think you're batshit crazy because of all the stuff that goes on in your life. And he was very much a non-believer of everything. He had recently just lost his brother and his mother, and within a space of a year of each other. And then I met him a year later. And so, he was kind of like, no, don't believe any of it. It's all just, fog's bottles and blah, blah, blah. And Anyway, I was with him one particular day, and I was like, "There's a man sitting on the lounge over there," and he's like, "Oh, whatever, keep me crazy to yourself," kind of thing. And then I described his brother, and that was the first turning point for him. And then the second turning point for him within a space of about 3 months was I kept saying to him, somebody's hung themselves in this house. Like, I keep seeing this person and they've hung themselves and da-da-da. And we recently, like shortly after that, found out that the person that he moved in to the unit because the person who lived there prior to had actually hung themselves. And so then he began to understand that I was legit. I just was the one who didn't believe it. And then, there were certain things like I went away, I took the kids to the snow, and he rings me up one morning and he's like, "Okay, I've had enough. I believe you now." He goes, "Somebody had leant over." This is the house with all the poltergeists. "Somebody leant over and called out, 'Where's Jana?'" And he was like, and he's woken up thinking, he must have just been dreaming. And he's sort of gone to roll over, and this thing whispered right close to his ear in a louder tone, "Where is Jana?" Like they were, it was very much they were wanting to know where I was. Yeah. And so he then rang me in the morning, and he just said, "Okay, I'm done. Like, I believe you now. I'm not going to doubt or criticize anymore." Because no one else was in the house. There was no justification. He couldn't explain it. And so he began to then not follow, but he would just, "Okay, I hear it." I had an older daughter as well who's very much like that. She was, "I don't ever want to listen. I don't ever want to know," until, she'd be sitting there reading a book and just scratching on the carpet or the walls or, like whatever random things juggling. And so he was very much the same. But then, behind closed doors, I would hear, I'd be sort of, mates would be around, and I'd go and grab a couple of beers for them and take it out to them, and I'd overhear him going, "Oh, she's freaky, like you've got no idea how freaky she is," like, and I'll walk in, "Oh, freaky about what?" Like, so the mockery became a series of, like, he did actually learn to understand that that's just who I was. I think it was like as the children started to develop their gifts as well, he then realized that it wasn't just having to deal with me and my cuckoos. The children were coming out with it too. So he didn't get a choice. He just didn't get a choice. Yeah.
Wow. So that's like the psychic part and what have you. So what happened then? Like with the cryptozoology, how did that sort of like? Am I moving on too fast, or just carry on telling us? Just
yeah,
because
sure.
I'm just listening to what you know. I mean, I don't really want to just carry on because people want to hear what's happened.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, I just the amount of stories. Did you want it based on paranormal or cryptozoology, or because there's just a lot of information there.
Well,
a lifetime, and it's consistent. My cryptozoology. So 2015, I had decided to take the children on a road trip and homeschool them. So, just to get some experience under everyone's belt. They were becoming like little gamers.
And where was you at the time? Because when I was talking, you seem to be moving around a lot. So was this in Australia? Was this in New Zealand? Or where was this?
Yep. So I was 9 when I moved to Australia from New Zealand. And then I've basically lived my life in Australia, and I only just came back to New Zealand a year ago. So I'm based here at the moment, but that's only temporary. And so my journey with the cryptozoology started. I took my children on a homeschool trip around Australia. We did 3 laps. Was only intending on going for 6 months and ended up going for 3 years. So in that time, it was in 2015. Now in Australia, they've got a what they would classify as an extinct animal called the thylacine, which is the Australian Tasmanian tiger. It's a marsupial dog, has stripes across its back. You probably recognize it through that. I think they had one in England Zoo as well. But so the last known thylacine was meant to exist in a zoo in Melbourne. And I was driving at about 1 o'clock in the morning. So, it was just easier to get long distance trips out the way. So the kids would sleep in the car at night and then I would drive, and then it doesn't seem like such a pain in the backside for everyone. So we were cruising out the outback of South Australia, heading from Victoria into South Australia. And my eldest daughter, she was 15 at the time, she was with me. We were both just driving down, and I see 3 Tasmanian tigers on the road. There was a kangaroo lying on the ground, and I thought, and I seen this Tasmanian tiger, and I'm like, I know what I'm seeing. Didn't want to stop, didn't think to stop. I just was like, oh my goodness, what is that? And then my daughter, who's 15, says, Mum, what is that? And I said, I think it's a Tasmanian tiger. And she's like, what's that? Because her schooling, they just never brought it up. It's an extinct animal. They don't need to do that sort of thing. And so as soon as we got onto reception, I Googled it, looked it up. She said, well, that's definitely it. I'm like, I know, like, this is crazy because they're supposed to be extinct. And so I kept that with me. Now, I used to have a journal that I would draw things that whenever we couldn't get the cameras out in time for, I would just, snapshot in my brain, and then I would go and draw it out. So I used to have this drawing journal, and I drew this thing in there, and then, continued to keep traveling. And then next thing you see, you draw it out. And a year later, I go and I have some time. So my kids were with friends or with their dad, I can't remember. And so I've taken a trip to Tasmania to go and see my cousin. And she's like, show me this journal. I'm so excited. I love watching your travel journeys. And so anyway, she's flicking through this book, and in this book comes up my drawing of the Tasmanian tiger. And she spots it and she says, what's this? And I said, don't worry about it. Just keep looking through, and she said, no, what is this? And that's when she then identified, and she said, I need you to come and have a look at this. And she's put my picture up in what I didn't realize was a Tasmanian tiger site. It was a Facebook page. And she just did a little write-up, and it just blew up. Now, the guy who owned who had the Facebook page, he then messages me, and obviously while I'm traveling proceeds to get me to go and start looking at these areas. So then I become quite educated on these animals and the habitats, and looking for evidence and, finding evidence. Yeah. And so I then become his little pet to go running around and finding all these really cool spots and doing his little legwork while I'm out on the road. What then happened is, while I realized, I began finding, so lots of people join extra groups. So you would find that with yours, how paranormal goes into ufology, and how, physics and all that sort of stuff. And then you get all your ley lines, and you get all your ground. Animals follow the same thing. And so I began to realize that there were other cryptozoology facets that were running the same corridors. And one of them happened to be what we call yowies in Australia, but they're the Australian Bigfoot for essentially. And so I began to friend lots of people. Now, at that point, I was also researching the Australian big cats, which is known as the panther. There was a separate breed we think is Thylacoleo, which is the feline marsupial in Australia. So the Tasmanian tiger was the dog looking, and then you have the feline, which is the cat looking, and it's quite large. And so both of them are marsupials, and both of them are known in Australia. So as sorry, what did I say? Marsupials, and they're cat and dog so to speak.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah. And so I had a big black cat sighting as well during my travels. So then I just banked on that, and I'm one of these people, I've got to see it to believe it. I'm not somebody who can just go, like I've never gone into ufology because I'd had experiences, but I'd
Yeah.
never really believed it up until I was in the bush one night and I seen a 5-foot grey staring back at me. He did not hide himself at all. And I thought, okay, like that's obviously my next part of my chapter coming, and I didn't really, um, get into the Yowies or the Bigfoots, Sasquatch. I didn't really get into the Yowies up until I started to have some pretty profound experiences. So what was happening was I would get phone calls from, Bigfoot groups.
Yeah.
We're going camping, we're doing this. We just loved hanging out. Let's face it, we're all, kindred people. And so what was happening is I would go camping, but I was going camping for what I was researching, and that was, the my panthers and my thylacines and my, all those sorts of things, and just wanting to learn the habits and get into the bush and really absorb the energies in the areas. And then what I found was happening was I'm then beginning to find things like cemeteries that had been shut down and non-existent. Or I'm finding sacred Aboriginal sites that were lost and forgotten knowledge for people. I was, and then when I would go out with these Yowie people, I would sort of be like, they would go, "What are you feeling, Jans? Because you're like the medium, the psychic. You'll be able to pick things up in the bush." Then I found that I was actually able to stand on the mountain and project myself, and I could view the mountain. And then I realized that I was actually able to then have like a telepathic communication with the Yowies. And I never understood what was actually happening at the time, up until my friends who would then say to me, this person in America has done documentaries about this, and this person said about this, and da 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 da. And so I never really get into podcasts per se, because I'm not one to kind of, the less I know, the better for me, for my information, for my knowledge base. And so I would rely on these people to go, okay, know what you're getting. And so I then became this person of, she really holds an uncanny sense when she's out in the bush. And so, then the invites start getting really, really serious. And so I would often go out, a couple of times a week. I'm one of these people, I need to be in the bush. I need to be either traveling or in the bush. It just keeps my energies alive. And so I was finding that, I would go around while I was traveling and interviewing people. And I would do these interviews where, whether it was big cat sightings or thylacine sightings, then I eventually I found myself taking random sightings of things that just aren't supposed to be there. So, crocodiles in rivers that are miles from where they're supposed to be, but they're baby crocodiles. Well, baby crocodiles come with a mother, we all know that. So that meant that there's crocodiles down in certain lakes and stuff in the Gold Coast which aren't supposed to be there. They're supposed to be far north Queensland. So you're looking at about a $2,000-3,000 space in which we're finding these animals, or like getting reports of like this shimmering. I had 6 reports sent to me in 1 year of a shimmering beast that was jumping between a predator-looking man, jumping between tree to trees, or just wherever it was. 6 particular sightings within a year up the entire east coast of Australia. And I thought, that just can't be, that can't be right. We were holding a Yowie meeting, and they were unveiling a book and a head that somebody had made, an artist had created. And one of the catering ladies just happened to tap me on the shoulder, picked me out of every single person there, and she said, I've got something that I'd like to share with you. Well, what she shared with me was something that I had also experienced, that there was only 7, 8 sightings. She was the 8th, for, 150 years. So she was the only other person, and I was like, it was almost like 3 people in our generational gaps that had sightings of this one particular animal. So,
And so, what did it look like? What did it look like? By the way, can I just say hi to Sandra? He says, "Good evening, guys, and interesting interview again." So,
okay.
so I just thought
Hi.
I'd tell you, we've got somebody saying hi. So what did this thing look like then? This creature.
So it's known as a diprotodon, and that is a megafauna of Australia. It is known to be what they classify it as a giant wombat. Now this thing will stand on all fours at the height of about 12 feet, 15 feet. Like, it's giant, it's massive. And when my daughter was with me, we were doing a long distance trip. We're actually heading to a homeschool camp. So we had left New South Wales. We were passing through Victoria to go to the bottom part of Australia. And as we were going through, we're about an hour north of Melbourne, or the outskirts of Melbourne. And, in Australia, kangaroos can be pretty brutal to the front end of your car. So what we would do was, we have the spotter as the passenger, and then I'm driving, and I as the driver, I'm looking to the right, my spotter's looking to the left. If we spot a kangaroo, you just slow down. So we're cruising down, we see a semi-trailer, bit of a road train. So he was about 2 kilometers ahead of us. And we just see him slam on the brakes. Now, a lot of truckies over in Australia, they don't stop. If they stop, they swerve, they lose their load. And kangaroos, there's so many of them, they just don't stop. And they'll just barge through. They don't care, unfortunately, and it's really sad, but that's just how it is. So you'll often get a lot of roadkill on the roads, because of all the trucks that are going through.
Yeah.
Now, I see this truck slam on the brakes, and I'm like, oh. Now, to me, as a driver and as a avid traveler, I understood that if he's slamming on his brakes, there's obviously one of 2 things. There's a large pack of kangaroos, or something else is on the road. But truckies just don't stop. They don't slam on their brakes when they're in the outback. So I was thought, no. Well, that's it. But he didn't continue to stop. He just slammed on his brakes, and then that was it. And so I thought, okay. And I said to my daughter, did you see that? And she goes, yep, onto it. So we start roo spotting. That was just our natural instinct to just go roo spotting. Turns out when we were approaching, there was this bear-like creature, had really pale tan fur, and it sat like the body of a polar bear. Almost looked similar to a polar bear, had these big round ears at the top, this big functioning round nose with a big black patch of its nostril area, and then these whopping big eyes, like these eyes sort of sat like that, and then this head, and then these big round ears, and it almost looked like a bear. It was weird. It was the most strangest looking creature. And I looked down on the road, and it's squamped on all fours. And it's eating what looked like grass, but it was like covering its food. Its head was so big, it was just covering its food. But I could see shards of grass that had grown through the road, through the cracks in the road. And I thought, this is super weird. Like, my daughter's like, are you going to stop, Mum? And I thought, did you see the size of that thing? Now, I was in a Tarago, so a Toyota Tarago. And this thing was it was squatted down on all fours. And this thing was the height of me and the car, like, as it was sitting down. And it looks up, and it's slow movement, kind of like a fast sloth in slow motion, and so it just looked up, looked at the headlights, looked at the car, turned around, and then it looked back, and then it went back down again. So I caught a whole facial feature. That was another part of my drawings that I wrote in my book. And my cousin's like, what that? And I just like just scroll on. You don't want to know about that one. But this creature, and my daughter was like, are you going to stop? Are you going to stop? And I said, did you see the size of that thing? If that thing stood up, I couldn't read if it was aggressive. I couldn't read anything of it. Like I was just in shock of what I was seeing. And so this lady, when she came to me, she was one of the caterers. She said, I've spoken to a couple of people about it. She said, everybody just mocks me. And I said, well, you've just probably pulled the one and only person in this room who has had experience with that. Now we have a man, we call him the godfather of cryptozoology in Australia. His name's Gary Opit. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. Now he was the man who I shared my sighting with. And she came to me, and I took her over to Gary after she'd shared her stuff with me. And Gary said, you were the last person to give me a sighting like this. And he said, you know, everything ticked off. He said, I've only had one other sighting from one other person. That was like 20 odd years ago. And that was it. We were the only 3 people in his lifetime that he's ever had any kind of understanding of sharing this animal. Yeah. So then my reputation came out as being a bit of a freak for weird shit, weird phenomena. And, you know, I would be with these Yowie people and, you know, friends, and we would go camping. We would just, you know, right, what are you doing this weekend? Yep, sweet, let's go. And so, you know, we would go and have events. They were very much into ufology. They understood a lot of stuff about it. I've got a lot of friends who understand a lot about it. But I just never followed it at the time. And so while we were out, I'll be like, oh, that's really strange. And it's like, what's that up there? And then I'm, oh my God, you know, like, you've done it again. You spotted another one, you know. There was a lot of like situations like that. I think my most recent events, though, and this is where I think where my ufology came into play, was in 2000. So everybody probably remembers that between 2015 and 2017, a lot of like highly spiritual people were getting downloads, messages, information, and everyone was feeling it was a big wave. The only way that people could describe it was like there's a wave of something coming, but nobody could really pinpoint what it was. And so I was one of those people. But while I was also on the road, I was healing myself. So I had a stomach issue, and my doctor had said to me, you need to go and get treatment. He basically showed me that I had bowel cancer, and I was like, I don't care, you know, at least I'm going to go and hit the road. I'm going to make memories with my children, and if I die on the road, so be it, but I'm going to go and heal myself. And he was like, you can't do that, you know, the pharmaceuticals and the doctors these days are all about no, you got to do this. And so I was like, no, I'm going to go and heal myself. And I didn't realize that only shamanic people have those abilities. And it was only introduced to me about 2018. And I'll get to this. So I was receiving during this time when we were getting the information of the big COVID wave, as we now know it, that I was also being sent in 2018, and it was started 2017, but it essentially exploded in 2018. And I was receiving dreams, inputs, messages, you know, psychic phenomena, all that sort of stuff, all the time. Like my brain just wasn't shutting down. You know, I'd be doing the dishes and boom, and then you'd be in the shower, boom, or, you know, like you're just constantly getting information. And during these information downloads, I was receiving things like patterns, symbols. I would see a you know, say for instance, a small pattern, like a circle with a dot, for instance. And then, you know, in my dreams, I would see the circle with the dot, and then I would come back, and then that circle with the dot was a part of a pattern. And then that certain with the dot and the pattern became like a a circular part of a crop circle, and then you go back again, and then you would realize that it was an actual larger scale crop circle. And what I didn't realize at the time was, that I understand now, was they were showing me maps. I was being shown certain elements, certain things that were contributing to a larger picture, but I was only receiving smaller parts. I was being given. I would go onto the internet and I would look for all these things that I'd been given, the symbols and stuff like that, and nothing matched. Nothing ever matched. And I had people say to me, do you think it might be like a sort of alien, like a contact thing? And I'm like, no, I don't believe in any of that stuff. Like, no, there's no way in the world that could be happening to me. Again, there's that lack of,
belief.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I had this thing like, I can't be that person. Like you look at these people and you think, wow, look at how awesome they are, and like people are like, that's just so you. And I'm like, no, I just can't do that. Anyway, so I was like, no, I don't think that would be the case. I have no knowledge of this stuff whatsoever. So as the years progressed, it would go in waves. So I would have, heightened information, and it would last for like 3 months, or, in and out of just whatever they were doing up there. And then, well, we can give her feed. It was like breadcrumbing me all the way. So 2019, I'm cleaning. So I have a business. I'm a professional cleaner, industrial cleaner. And so I'm at work one day, and one of the particular symbols that I had dreamt of, that I was shown, was, I was sort of chemicals in one hand, and I'd like spray the shower screens and these new houses. So I'm like, chemicals in one hand, and I worked so quick that I was like, spray, wipe, spray, wipe, spray, wipe. What I hadn't realized is, like, I'd drawn with the chemicals the pattern that I had dreamt about. And it was almost like I drew this pattern, and I've seen it, recognized it. It was like just so quick. Seen it, recognized it, caught the slap up the back of the head, like boof, there it is. And I'd wiped over it, and I was like, oh my God, I could have got like a photo or something, like, because it triggered what was happening. So the second time I had been at a kid's birthday party, and I got this mini meat pie, and I squirt sauce, a savory pie, and I squirt sauce on the top of it. And I go to eat it, and then I realized that this pattern's on it again. And I thought, that was the moment when I went, something is actually really happening here, that what I'm dreaming about with this message and information that's given to me is now coming out in my physical, is now, now it's really being shown in my physical dimension as we are. And I thought, I really can't ignore this. I then began to understand that there was something a little more phenomenal than what I was used to, being the typical psychic medium, being the typical, like, even doing what I was doing at the time, to be able to stand on a mountain and then pick the animals that are on the mountain. People can't do that. People just don't do that. And here I was doing these things. So I thought, there's just something in this. So I you kind of let it go, and you just wait for the next load of information to come through. So I'm documenting all of this information at the same time, taking mental notes, taking, like, drawing down things that I was seeing. And then in 2020, when the wave hit, then I was like, oh, well, I kind of knew that this was happening from, like, 3 years ago, and the whole global world agenda thing, all the same things was all all the puzzle pieces are falling into play, and it's all starting to come out, and all the conspiracy people are now not so conspiracy people, truth seekers now. And so we kind of led to a point where we I went and seen a lady, a friend of mine. She's a witch. She's also a skilled counselor. It's her trade. So I went and spoke to her. She's a good friend of mine. She said, we're going to pop you under hypnosis. see what comes out. So I go under hypnosis because I'm thinking I was just overwhelmed. It was a lot of information, a lot of things to comprehend, and a lot of things that I needed to understand about me. A lot of the times I will research a lot of the stuff because I need to know that it's not, that I'm not crazy, and that these things are actually real and they're happening, and it's not just a part of my imagination. And so I sought solace in her. She puts me under hypnosis, and I was under for about an hour and a half. Now, in this time, she comes out, I come out of it. She said, "What do you remember?" And I said, "I just remember this really tall Egyptian lady, like looking up at this Egyptian lady." So I'd walked in and I'd seen my spirit team. And when they sort of just did this movement thing, and I had to go and stand in this particular spot. And in come these four little, like wearing the Roman dresses with, like the curtain robe, the spiral curtain. So they had that around their heads. They had that around as their belts. And they were wearing these long white dresses. Every single one of them looked the same, and they all looked like exactly the same. And they, like, the hair was cut short, black, about sort of this long, straight black hair. And four of them walk in. So there's four, and then they separate. So two at the back, two at the front. And I reckon she's about 17 foot tall. Huge Egyptian lady walks in, stands directly center with all of them, looks me up and down, and then looks at my guides and says, "Not ready yet." And then looks me up and down, and then turns and leaves. And I'm looking at my guides like, ready for what? What is happening? Like, you need to give me answers now. Like, this is ridiculous. And so I then leave that place. I leave, like, that hypnosis session. I now classify as trance sessions. Okay, so we'll be getting to that. And so I leave that hypnosis session, and I come back to, and my friend says to me, "What do you remember?" And I said, "I just remember this really tall Egyptian lady." And she said, "I'm not ready." And I was like, "I don't understand what I'm not ready for." And she said, "Do you remember the aliens?" And I was like, "What?" Like, no, I do not. And so apparently I had been taken by these aliens, and then, had it was just a thing that had happened. It was like during the course of this session. So I walked away with that information, didn't really think anything of it. About, I think it was 3 months later, I got it was about 7-8 weeks later, I got really, really sick with COVID. Like, I nearly died. I had my mum, who had been passed away for 25 years. She was pacing the end of my bed, and I looked over and I thought, "What are you doing here?" And she's like, she didn't say anything, kept pacing. I'd go back to sleep, I'd wake up, she's still there. And I looked over and I said, "I'm not going." And then she's like, "Well, then you need to come around the side of the bed." She said, "Then you need to fight. You need to fight, Jana. You need to fight." And I was like, "What? That's it. Blankets off, up, and I'm going to work." And then, I went through a series of.
I just asked you. You said that you was told that you'd been taken by aliens. But what type of aliens had actually taken you?
I don't know. I think they may have been the tall grey type, but I don't know, because I don't actually remember that part.
But she didn't actually tell you what.
She was just relaying what I was saying, what I was seeing.
Right.
And I've just said, like, mentioned aliens and that shit. So she's written everything down.
Right.
And so so during the course of me getting really, really sick, I was also still receiving a lot of download information. I don't like to call it a download, because I don't feel like it is for me. I just feel like it's I'm just being shown things, I'm being given
information.
Yeah.
I know what you're saying. Yeah.
So I then proceed to hold that information. I then get very sick. And while I'm also going through this information, a lot of things are coming to me, and I'm getting more information. So what I was getting in 2017, 2018, I was then getting, like, that was just a smaller piece of the puzzle. And now that puzzle then got bigger. So it was the same sort of information, but it was just getting more more in depth with the information that they were showing me.
Right.
And so I then began what I didn't know I could do was remote view. So my gifts were also enhancing, and it got to a point. This is when I found the alien. 2018 was also the time that I'd seen the alien in the bush. We'd been out yowie hunting, and this is when I'd spotted. Within a space of 3 weeks of seeing that, I seen a huge mothership. Now that mothership was like glistening. But it was pulsating, and then it would send like a shimmer of different colors around it. But this thing that was sort of like, and I've never seen another spaceship like it. Like you see a lot of places that will, show the style of the spaceship, and this one wasn't it. And so we were actually heading out to a paranormal investigation.
What shape was it?
Okay, so it kind of domed at the top and then went down, and then it domed again and then went down, and then it domed again and then dropped. But the top layer went down, and that was clear. And then when it went down again and then dropped down, that was small and thin, and it had like what looked to be lots of window panels. So there was just little like window, around the entire.
So like a free tier sort of like object. Right, I get it. Yeah.
Definitely. And it sort of stepped up and then went around. Now, obviously, I couldn't see the bottom because it was behind a line of trees.
Yeah.
I just happened to be the only one in the car that seen it. I sort of looked around, and I'm one of these people who are like, okay, I'm never going to share that with anybody because no one will believe me. And then you go, oh, I know I have to, because then, whatever's going to happen next is just it's going to be evidence of that happening and da-da-da. So, now the night that I seen the alien, we went out bush looking for yowies, and I was doing my thing. We have to walk through a haunted tunnel to get to the site where these yowies are. And so and this is on the Sunshine Coast in Australia. It's very, very well known for a lot of yowie activity there. But there's also been UFO phenomena that's been witnessed there as well. And the first time I went there, I had found a Aboriginal sacred site. So this place is very, very connected in a lot of different ways. And so I'd found it was actually not a sacred site. It was a massacre site. Like I'd seen a portal doorway to the bottom of this track, and I thought that's not right. So I went down and I put my hand on the ground when we got to the spot, and this is massacre site just opened up, and I thought, okay, like this is not okay. But anyway, getting through it. So we were up at this other particular spot. We were walking through this tunnel. We get to the edge, we go up the top, and that's where I seen the alien. And I thought, I'm never going to say anything. And then I realized I better, just in case something else had happened. We venture back down the track. We're about to go right, and I said to Ron Quinton is Sunshine Coast Yowie Trackers. I said to Ron, we have to turn left.
Yeah.
He goes, okay, well, you're the lady of the hour. We'll go with that. We get back and we hit a bend, bit of a small bend. We get down this bend, and right in front of us across the track, I was luckily filming. And right across the end of this track, we catch these two massive red eyes that sort of jump. They look in the middle of the path, look at us, turn, and then runs off again. There was no... we thought, wow, did everyone see that? Yep, everyone caught that. So we get down to this area, so we've got to go and look for foot tracks and stuff like that and see if we can track down where this thing's gone. We get down there wasn't so much as a footprint, and this thing was about 1 meter high. Okay, it was probably just short of 1 meter high. It was too short to be a yowie, and it was too tall to be a yowie on its. It may have been crawling. That's what we thought, possibility, but there should still be tracks of some kind. There was absolutely nothing. When you looked at the end of the track veered around to the left. We could see trains. So the original train line came down, and you would actually go underneath the tunnel, the original tunnel, but they've shut it down and they've diverted the tracks, and it goes around this section, and the tracks have changed. Now, this particular night, we were watching the trains go past. So we see cargo trains, we see passenger trains, people in the passenger trains. You could see the window spaces, your LED lights all the way. We could see everything.
Yeah.
When we went back 6 weeks later, I had my first paracrypt event. It was in 2019, 18. I had an American shamanic man with me. He was over traveling, and we had hooked up, and so he was on my first adventure. And we went back there 6 weeks later, and what we didn't realize at the time was we had experienced a timeline shift the very night that I had seen the alien. So when we went back, we're walking down the path, and I said to Ron, this path seems to go a little too long. Like, I thought it was too short. Like, where we had walked was almost like half the distance of the gap that we had walked the first night. And I thought, that's just not right. That seems odd. But, again, misconception. It's easy to do. We are human. And then I thought, as I was looking around and we were scoping the situation, and I said, Ron, look, I said, the trees. So we had a train start coming by, and I was like, we could see the people in the train. You can't see anything. So it was almost like the trees had been planted 20 years earlier, or, whatever, 100 years earlier. And the trees had gone from being small little knee-height shrubs to being fully grown gum and eucalyptus trees, which are 3-4 stories high, 5 stories high, some of them. So you had these gigantic trees that were covering an entire bush. When this passenger train comes through, you could barely see the LED lights, yet we watched this passenger train come through, go up the tracks, full LEDs. You could see the passengers in the train 6 weeks earlier to what we were seeing after that. And at that point, people were just like, that must have been a Mandela effect. I'm like, what's Mandela effect? Because, again, I'm still learning all this stuff. And it's the only thing that we can come up with was that it was a timeline shift. So that place kind of became quite special to us. I've only felt that twice up that area. Both times it's like you're walking into a dome, and the vibe, it's almost like when you hit these places, all I feel and hear, I hear it. It's like a hum in my ear. Now, I don't know, nobody else seems to hear it or feel it. I do. And so, but, every single time we do, we're experiencing phenomenal, events in our research. And you can only just add that to your data list and go with that. So going back to the whole thing that's happening now, the beginning, it was sort of like the beginning of this year. Now, going back to, seeing the tall Egyptian lady, and, being sent by my guides and being assessed by this lady, I was working with a man who was, just needing to have a bit of information, a bit of help with his ascension process and stuff like that. So I was doing a bit of, I don't know if you'd know the green emerald tablets. The top green emerald tablets. So we were basically just doing a silly thing online, and you sort of go through and you read the 12 tablets and what's your perception of this and what's your perception of that. And I started to kind of like give my opinion on things, and then I found like I would almost like phase, and I would start talking of what it was, but it didn't feel like it was me saying it, but I knew I was talking it. It was weird. So then what I didn't realize at the time is I began channeling, and I was channeling all of this stuff. And so at one particular point, it was one particular night, we had been doing this 12th tablet, and my ear just started to like hum, and I thought, oh, that's really weird. My ear's just gone really, I get, to people will go, it's tinnitus. Some people say it's all downloads, depending on which ears or whatever. The frequencies ripple, all that sort of stuff. I've learned to tap into that. And a lot of that, when I tap into that, takes me on journey spots. So I had this hum in my ear, and he said, why don't you tap into it? And I thought, okay, well, yeah, why not? Like, drop in. So he goes to the toilet. I drop in, and as soon as I dropped in, I'm standing in front of this tall Egyptian lady again, just like that. And I look at her, and I'm like, obviously she's 17 foot tall. I'm looking at her, and then I don't know if you've ever seen Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, but this was my situation. I'm looking at her, and then all of a sudden, I'm growing eye level with her, and then I'm looking down at her, and it was as quick as that. And I thought, what, obviously while I'm doing this, I'm like, what is happening to me right now? And then she just gets this kind of like little smile. She looked like an African lady, big nose, big brown eyes, big lips. And she just sort of looks at me. She's looking, but at that point, she's then looking up at me. So I've grown to about 25 foot tall, and she's looking up at me. And then she goes, she sort of like does a little nod, and she smiles. She turns, and I follow her. And then my snap into it, like, you sort of phase out and then you phase back in. And I'm standing on a planet, and I've got this silver craft that's below me because I'm quite tall. It's below me. I just see a small snippet of the edge of the silver craft. And I turn around, and there is a man an alien walking towards me. He's very tall, blue. He's got this long, elongated thing at the head. Normal face, long cankly fingers, really long cankly arms, skinny torso. And I see this alien walking over to me, and he puts his hand out, his long cankly fingers, puts it out, places it on my shoulder, and he goes, "Welcome home." It was almost like all I heard was like "Welcome home, brother," but it wasn't that. He didn't say that. He just, like, I heard him say "Welcome home," and then he said something else, and I was like, "That's what?" And I look down at my body, and I realize I look exactly the same as him. And I have like this brown, like a freckle, which looks similar to like a snowflake. So, when you see the definitions of a snowflake, or like when moss or mold in a circular pattern grows and it spreads, I've got like two of these on my belly. And I'm like, then I realize that I'm one of him. And I thought, I'm out. I can't do it. Like, no way, I'm out. And so I pull out of that. And at that point I've opened my eyes, and my mate, he's jumping on his bed, like airborne, woo, how'd you go? How'd your drop in go? Like, and I've just gone, just covered my face and just went, I can't. And I start shaking. And then as soon as he's going, what's happened? What, are you okay? And I'm like, no, I can't explain that. Wow. And so this is an entirely different chapter for me now, because this is where I've had to do crash courses.
Well, we'll have to stop at that chapter for tonight, because I know we sort of like we came on a couple of minutes late and what have you. So we've done us hour. We've been on an hour. So
there's
we're going to have to say again, sorry.
I said there's a lot. I told you there was a lot.
Well,
but that's
yeah.
good.
But say again?
I said it's been lovely to be on.
Well, we'll have to have you back on again. And yeah. So, and soon as well, because it's quite fascinating what you've told us. It really is. Yeah. And there's a lot of things that I know I've heard other people talk about, some things that you've spoken about earlier on, sort of like I'm thinking, wow, but it has been fascinating.
Thank you.
So what I will say, Jenny, which is thanks for being on. And what I will say to everybody, thanks for listening. And I hope you've enjoyed the show as much as I have, everybody that's listened. And I will say to everybody again, and Sandra's just come on, and again, couldn't think of any questions, but it were a great interview. Well, the thing is, if you didn't think and you were listening, myself, I think that's pretty good, because sort of like if people are listening and sort of like that's pretty good,
No
So I think
boredom.
brilliant. Yeah, what can I say? That is